So please welcome John Morris, who will introduce tonight's speaker, Irme Schaber.
If you don't mind, I'm going to stand closer to your level. Anyway, it's such a pleasure to come here again. I've been at the front line many times. It's the only club well, now I belong to the Overseas Press Club, but this is a club with a clubhouse. That's rather nice. And when have been living in Paris for the past 25 years, there's 6 cities in my life, beginning with Chicago, where I grew up and went to university, and then New York and Los Angeles and Washington and London during the war, which is why I'm here tonight. I helped both Vaughan and Pranvera choose the pictures, which you see throughout the club. I think I'm glad to see they haven't taken them down yet. At any rate, I don't know a great deal about this young woman. She has refused to tell me her personal history. So I have to start by explaining a bit of mine. But she is by far the best informed on the subject of tonight, Gerda Taro. I am fairly well informed on Robert Capa, with whom I worked in the war. I was his editor on D-Day. I had first come to London as a student in 1935 on a freighter from New Orleans, which cost all of $19.50. $18.50, correct. Landed in East London docks early in one July morning with one suitcase. I was with another student friend from Chicago. Walked to the nearest bus. Somebody had given us a £5 note, gave it to the chippy, who immediately stopped the bus and said, "Are you pulling my leg?" At any rate, London is a very favorite city of mine, next to Chicago. But the story of tonight really begins with June 6, 1944, and I was Robert Capa's editor on D-Day. And 15 years later, I had the unfortunate privilege of helping his family bury him when he stepped on a landmine in Indochina. You will hear a little bit about Capa tonight, but it's my real privilege and pleasure to introduce Irme Schaber, a scholar from Germany, who will not tell me, as I said, her private life. But she has written a biography of
It's very boring, John. It would be very boring.
We first met about 12 years ago, I think it was, in Fellbach. There's a German delegation here tonight from the area of Fellbach, which is a suburb of Stuttgart. And it's also the home of 2 of my very favorite life photographers, and little known actually. Hansel Mieth, who was the second woman photographer hired by Life magazine after it started. The first was Margaret Bourke-White, and her husband, Otto Hagel. They both came from Fellbach. They're my really dearest friends, and it was to honor their memory and with Hansel that I actually first visited Fellbach and met Irme. So now I think I've talked much too much, and we'll let you hear from the master.
Thank you, John. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am very happy that I was asked to speak here at the Frontline Club about the woman photographer Gerda Taro, because she has now an exhibition at the Barbican, but she is really not well known, and therefore I think it's very nice to come to an audience which is especially interested in photojournalism. And I want to give you a little bit background, not only about Gerda Taro's work in Spain and her connection to Robert Capa, but also to her personal history in Germany, because I think this history is very important for that what she has done in Spain. When we today look at photographers like Helmut Newton or Laszlo Moholy-Nagy or some others, we perceive their international career, but we usually do not notice their exile experience. Before I speak now, I had forgotten to say that I am not a native speaker, and therefore I read a lot of, and perhaps you have your fun with my pronunciation, but I hope that you understand what I want to say. In the other case, you have to cry or things like that. Yes. Okay. I want to start with Gerda's family and her story in Germany, but for the first, we had here one of the first pictures she made in Barcelona when she came to Spanish Civil War. This was the presentation of the book, of the catalog, I don't know. Running away from the Nazis and from fascism caused economic and social misery, and often was linked often with the Bantu work and with an identity crisis. And this is often forgotten. In the case of Taro and Capa, this experience of threat and of bearing a loss plays a very important role, because both of them reacted with or in their photographical work in the Spanish Civil War, not only to the ongoing political and social development, but also to their own displacement and uprooting. This picture is not directly to that what I say, but I want to show you an actual picture out of the Mexican suitcase, which was found, I think you have heard about this found in, I think it was February this year, that the ICP got a suitcase or a box with a lot of photos from Robert Capa, Gerda Taro, and their friend Jim from Spanish Civil War. And this suitcase is still, we work still with it to look all through the film rolls and film cuts, and hope to find also new work as well as material we don't have a negative until now. Gerda Taro was born in Stuttgart in the south of Germany in 1910. She was the daughter of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. Her father traded with eggs, like many others in this family. And at that time, Stuttgart was the capital of the little kingdom Württemberg. It was not the Bundesrepublik Deutschland. It was not the Germany we know nowadays. And the home of Gerda's family was not far from the home of King William, who was at that time a very beloved, popular monarch. Her real name was Gerda Pohorülle, and on this picture we can see her with her classmates in 1918 in a nearby school. Gerda is this one, first row, the fourth from the left. The First World War determined her childhood. She encountered various deprivation. The girl grew up with food ration cards and experienced air raids. And after the collapse of the Habsburg Empire, the Pohorülle family automatically had become Polish. Gerda lived the typical problems of Jewish minorities and of second-generation immigrants. But I think she managed this very well. You see here, exactly 10 years later, in 1928, Gerda is engaged with a man beside her. This is Peter Bote. He was her first love. She met him on the tennis yard. A smart, elegant salesman, about 10 years older than her. Peter introduced Gerda to Stuttgart nightlife as well as to football. In some respect, he was the role model for the later product design of her later product, Robert Capa. He was the one who she had in his head to say who is a successful guy. Gerda herself had got a very profound school education, inclusive a public school in Switzerland. She spoke fluently English, French, and also a little bit Spanish that she had learned at the commercial school. She was a sportive teenager, interested in fashion and film stars. She liked dancing, and she wasn't interested in politics at all in these times in Stuttgart. In 1929, the Pohorille family, Gerda had 2 younger brothers, moved to Leipzig. The growing strength of the National Socialists and an increasing, for Gerda no longer ignorable, anti-Semitism led within a short time to a rapid politicization. Compared with Stuttgart, her circle of friends in Leipzig radically changed. There, all of them were Jewish and leftist. The most important influence within this leftist intellectual milieu was by her new lover, Georg Kuritzkes. I don't have a picture here, but you can look in my book from him. It's also a fine young man. By Georg Kuritzke and by his mother. His mother was a revolutionary and intellectual who worked with Lenin himself years before. Gerda in Leipzig had met Kuritzkes, who was a medical student at a Jewish sports club. In 1933, Gerda, as well as her younger brothers, she was involved in several illegal activities. Sitting on the motorcycle together with Sass, Schmidt Sass was a poet and a music teacher. What does one say? She made illegal activities. They distributed flyers and fixed posters and things like that. And in April 1933, when her brothers already had gone underground, she was arrested by an SR stormtrooper raid. And this guy, I have only here a picture of the book cover. It was the man with whom together she went to do these activities. Later on, he was murdered in Berlin, executed in Berlin, because he was also in the resistors, in the German resistors. Yes, she was arrested by stormtrooper raid, was in Leipzig in the prison, in a woman prison. And 3 weeks later, she was released thanks to the Polish consul, because it was thanks that she had a Polish passport because of the history of her parents. And after these 3 weeks in the prison, it was clear that she has to leave Nazi Germany as soon as possible, and her brothers still were in the underground. She arrived then in Paris in autumn 1933, and she would never see her brothers or her parents again. For Gerda, the French capital became both a place of asylum and also a city of dreams. She had a few other friends from Leipzig, and a few other friends from Leipzig belonged in Paris to a loose-knit left-wing circle of immigrants associated with the exile fraction of the SRPD. This is the Socialist Workers' Party of Germany. It was a very small splinter, you say in English, splinter group between the communists and the Social Democrats, and they had their exile headquarters in Paris. But there was also a part of this group, and some people of them also were here in London. She and the Leipzigers favored this colorful, heterogeneous exile group because they shared their anti-fascism, but also their very critical view of Stalinism. Anyway, Gerda sympathized with the small party, but she was not a member. In autumn 1934, she met Andre Friedman, who soon became her teacher at the camera and her lover. I make it very short, all the things. Friedman was 3 years younger than Gerda, and they moved into a small apartment near the Eiffel Tower. Gerda worked as a photo editor at Alliance Photo, and she acted as his manager. I just mentioned that she spoke several languages, and she was also a perfect typist. This picture here is by Fred Stein. Fred was also an immigrant from Germany and a member of the SAP party. In Germany, he had finished law school, but he couldn't work with this. It didn't help anything to earn his living, to get his living in France. And so he had started to work as a photojournalist. And with him, Gerda also started working in the darkroom before she was with Friedman together. That means there were connections before to photography or things like that through Fred Stein, who made this photograph here. The picture here shows Gerda and Andre in front of the Café du Dôme, which was almost their living room in Paris. Gerda and Andre could not afford film and chemicals for extensive training with the camera. The film was too expensive to spend it frequently on training snaps, and they had often the problem that the camera was at a pawnbroker's shop. Fortunately, her role as a picture agent at Alliance Photo enabled her to expand and to deepen her knowledge. This letter here is a love letter from Andre to Gerda, written in a pretty bad German. In February 1936, she received her first press card from ABC Press Service, and a friend recalled that her first published photograph had appeared in a fashion magazine. Though both of them worked hard, they always were lack of money. Gerda and Andre were not the only immigrants in those years that tried to make their living with photography. Paris had, within a very short time, become the established center for exile photographers from Germany. It was Paris and London, but in the beginning it was mainly Paris, because in the beginning the immigrants, they went to Paris and thought, perhaps with Hitler, perhaps it needs some weeks or 3 months and then we can go back. They didn't want it to go far away, and therefore Paris was a good place in the beginning. And therefore it was in Paris also that there was a really hard, strong competition. Again, a picture by Fred Stein from Gerda. She had lived with him and his wife Lilo for a while, and when Gerda met Friedman, he soon made also friends with the couple. In order to improve their depressing economic situation, Gerda developed PR manager qualities. She designed a new outfit for Andre. As what I said with Peter Bode, his leather jacket he had to put away and things like that. She sent him to the hairdresser, and it was Gerda who had the idea to create stage names. They did not Gallicize their names, but instead chose to add a breath of Hollywood. That was the birth of Robert Capa and Gerda Taro. They reinvented themselves and created almost new identities. They had really created a perfect story, what they told in the newsroom about this Robert Capa and so on. But there are a lot of fairy tales about this birth process, inclusive the fairy tales Capa himself put it to them. And what I want to emphasize is that we are in reality far away from a romantic success story, because in that time it was not only a reaction on their empty money bags, but also on the situation in Spain, which since 1934 became dramatically for refugees and for foreigners, and there was a increasing hostility against foreigners, and they thought, like many other immigrants, they thought it's better that the people do not hear in the beginning that you are a refugee from Eastern Europe. It could be better you are an American, successful American unknown photographer or such a thing. In 1936, the military coup in Spain shocked the world, and the Spanish Civil War became for both as photographers and as lovers a dramatical turning point in their lives. Gerda Taro and Robert Capa arrived in Barcelona in August 1936, Capa with a Leica, Taro with a Rolleiflex, and we see here out of the Taro contact sheets the Rolleiflex with a square format 6:6. Later on we will see also the Taros. This is the thing that we, for the beginning, when they did their first journey to Spain in the summer 1936, it was very easily for us to distinguish the photographs, because it was nice for them to have different formats to use them. But later on, Gerda unfortunately also used the Leica and here Convex, and we had all the rectangular 35mm format. These are some of the Aragon front and in Barcelona pictures from the very beginning. I don't know, so small, but it gives a little impression. In Barcelona, Taro soon got in touch with the PUM. This is the sister party of the German SRP, of the party she was connected. All of the pictures which I show now took Taro through the first weeks in the Aragon front lines and in Barcelona, where the revolution celebrated a victory and the children played on the barricades. The new government ordered the general mobilization, worker committees and militia units were created. Common people were in arms. Photos of uniform-wearing and armed women were a must for picture stories from Spain. For the newspaper editors in Paris or London, these women symbolized the break with the old order and the revolutionary turn in Spain. In Death in the Making, the illustrated book on the first year of Spanish Civil War with pictures taken by Capa and Taro, Capa wrote a sad comment on the photo of a militia unit. That day, he wrote, they did not know that this was now a war, and that they could not have known what was in store for them. And I think he could have added that also he and Gerda had no idea too, because like the soldiers and other volunteers, they went with romantic and useful feelings into their first war. This is a photo by Robert Capa showing Gerda behind a soldier. It's near Cordoba. And this one is an image she had taken at the Aragon front in August 1936. 2 months later, in October, it was published in the Illustrated London News. Assigned with the ambivalent, I couldn't pronounce correctly, caption, ambivalent caption, typical defenders of the Spanish Republic. On the back of this vintage print is the original German caption, likely by Gerda herself, some strong defenders of the Republic. And I don't think that she meant that ironically. On the contrary, also, or just because their poor equipment, and the lack of weapons of the militiamen, and they don't have uniforms and things like that, they showed determination And I think Gerda shared the feeling that it's enough to fight against fascism with a lot of enthusiastic people and with a great determination. And I think this was a feeling lots of them in the very outset of Spanish Civil War on the Republican side have had. And I think when she gave such a caption to a picture, it really was the thing she believed, and it wasn't naive. With this photo, Taro gives us an accurate metaphor about the conflict in Spain, which was not only a civil war, but also a battle between two ideologies. From its very beginning, Spanish Civil War was an international conflict which divided the public opinion in the Western democracies. For that reason, because the fight between communism and fascism, and because of the advanced media technique in that time, Spanish Civil War became the first modern media war. That caused spectacular worldwide campaigns. After the military coup, thousands of volunteers from all over the world went to Spain to join the fight against fascism, including writers like Ernest Hemingway or the filmmaker Joris Evans, both of them she met or worked with them some time, who saw in the threat to the Republic an attack on their own ideas of freedom. Or there were a lot of people from the UK who went to Spain. We just saw John Langton Davis, whose book is now reprinted about his experience in Spanish Civil War. Some, like George Orwell, John Cornford, or the German Gustav Regler, went even further and took up arms themselves. Here we have a rectangular photo by Gerda Taro. This is from 1937. I only mention it when it's a Capa or of somebody else, and all the rest are Taro photos. Spanish Civil War was in military and in media sense a forerunner of World War II. During the industrialized wars of the last century, photography became a decisive factor of warfare, both for straight military purposes as well as for propaganda. And this title from Regard by Gerda Taro is this is a propaganda picture, and it shows propaganda. It was taken during the Writers' Congress in 1937 in Madrid. It was in the 1920s, 1930s that photography has got a technical potential to generate valid, meaningful pictures which fascinated because of dynamic. In the history of photojournalism, the press photography of Spanish Civil War is considered as a quantum leap in the photography of war. Mostly because then, for the first time, a war was photographed for magazine press with a print run in millions, and therefore for an absolutely new mass audience. The picture we see here is by Taro from Spain, from Brunete, the place where she two weeks later died. But on the text here, you see that it announces the next war in China, and she and Capa had. They tried to get the accreditation to go to China. When Gerda, she planned to go back to Paris and then to go with Capa together to China to cover the Chinese-Japanese war. Robert Capa's picture of the falling soldier became part of the global collective memory. It is a famous visual symbol, not of modern war, but as a general and archaic image of fighting. And the essential subject of this picture is the victim, which shows an emotional and unconscious gesture. And therefore, it's nothing in this loneliness. It's not a picture for the modern war, absolutely not. It's more an archaic image of war and the loneliness in the fight. But what perhaps is more interesting in this picture nowadays is because until it was printed in the first time, there is a controversial debate whether the falling soldier is a fake or if this picture shows actually the moment of his death. We have at the Barbican at the moment, there is one room with all the pictures around the falling soldier, and it shows a new level and discussion in the state of research about falling soldier. A short remark to Death in the Making, the book with the pictures from Capa and Taro after 1 year in the Spanish Civil War. It was published after Gerda's death. And about a quarter of the pictures is by Gerda, but her name is not on the cover of the book, and it's not on the dust cover of the book. It's only here inside, very small. And I think this is one of the reasons, like several others, historical and also others which are more in the history of or in the behavior of Robert Capa, that it was relatively easy to omit her later on, that she was forgotten. This picture Gerda has taken at Cerro Moyano, where Capa shot the falling soldier. And you see here the man on the left. This is the falling soldier, the man who became the falling soldier. In total, I could clearly identify 10 images she took there. That was just because of the argument whether if the picture of a falling soldier is a fake or not. It's important, the reconstruction of this situation on the hill at that time and at the 5th of September in 1936. For the ICP, where there is the inheritance of Capa and Taro, for decades, they weren't aware that they had that treasure in their archives. They didn't look so exactly on the details of Gerda's photos they had in their archive. And when I worked through her archive the first time for this exhibition, we now have the Barbican. We started in 2005, and I worked with Richard Whelan, the Capa biographer. He was very astonished how many pictures through my research work we could assign to Gerda and give a clear point to say which date and on which place it must have been, because in that time here it was interesting because one could clear the place because of the grass, because of the hill, and because of about seven soldiers or militia, parts of the militia. One can see then on the Taro photos very exactly how they went up to the hill, how they went down to the hill, and things like that. We don't speak about falling soldier now, but it's interesting that we now have also photos of Gerda Taro in this discussion. This is the third one where we see Gerda is behind the men. Capa very often was in front of the soldiers. He had, or beneath them, he had another position, and one can follow them for a while. We make now a jump. 3 weeks after the air raid of the Condor Legion on Guernica, Taro photographed the result of night attacks on Valencia. She had recognized long before the destruction of the Basque town that this war in Spain meant a rupture in civilization. There's a series of them one can see in the Barbican and also in the catalog. She took a lot of photographs there, and there was one big story about it she could show in a French magazine at that time. The German Wehrmacht tested their brand new equipment and weapons based on their military strategy of the total war. The bomber squadrons of the German Condor Legion made the civilian population in Spain the deliberate target of military action in a way it happened never before. It was a new quality of war. And it was exactly this aspect of technologically superior warfare on which Gerda's reporting focused. I can better read for myself than before the audience. It's terrible. Showing the destruction and the fleeing civilians was central to Taro's work, and of course to Capa's, but even to show Taro. This combination, above Capa and below Gerda Taro, was published in one of the first books on Spanish Civil War in Switzerland, a first extensive book on Spanish Civil War with a good analysis, yes, in 1937, and there were several pictures by Taro and by Capa in it. Their photographs of houses with ripped-off facades were both threatening and surreal, but during the war, the battlefields and the events on the front lines more and more came to the foreground. From the first weeks of civil war, Taro rejected the safe and distant attitude of the typical reporter at that time. She sought new angles and forms to express solidarity through participation. Her extreme readiness to assume a risk was, beside her focus on the civilian population and on the victims of that war, another reason for the significance of her pictures from Spain for us nowadays. Taro tried to get as close as possible to the fighting soldiers facing the same risks and dangers. Because she accompanied the soldiers in attacks, she had a reputation of being very courageous. Courageous. I know that I cannot speak it correctly. It's not. I don't want to make jokes, but there are several words where I always try to say it correct, and I don't catch it. Sorry. Because it's not a point to make a joke, and but it was an. Ebbe couldn't say me a better word, which was easier for me, or so. It was really so that she went, that she accompanied attacks, and we have several sources for that. That's not only a myth or the legend. That is a fact. I think that this was caused her the readiness to take risks, that this was caused by her life-threatening experiences in Hitler Germany. She knew what fascism meant, and at that time, she was just here in Segovia and so on. She was furthermore particularly worried about her old parents, who already had lost their business and home in Leipzig. At that time, they had been forced to move into a house which then became a so-called Judenhaus, a house of Jews. And it was the beginning of that the Jews had to live in special areas, in special houses. It was the beginning before they were transported out, but the time before they got more and more problems to live in Gerda and other people. We can see that in the letters of that time. Were very worried what happened with them, and they had sorrows and pain because they couldn't help anymore. Her fight against fascism was existential. Like many other German exiles in Spain, she hoped with her anti-fascist commitment to stop Hitler and to avoid World War II. In the 1930s, Taro's photographs were widely reproduced in French leftist press like Vue or Regard, but also in Switzerland in Illustrated London News, and she was a correspondent of the Volksillustrierte, which was the exile edition of the famous German magazine AIZ, Workers' Illustrated Journal, which was famous for its photography in the 1920s in Germany, very important for lots of photographers later on make an international career. And because of John Hartfield's photomontage, I think perhaps some of you know these pictures from the 30s against Hitler. In the 1930s, her images were published, but very often without a copyright. It was the time many photographs were published without any author and without any copyright, or it was published under the copyright Capa. And then later on in 1937, but also in the end of 1936, we had found the first with the stamp Photo Taro. And she and Capa at that time, when they divided their copyrights, she worked for her own projects with Photo Taro, and for the joint projects they had a label. It's called Reportage Capa and Taro. And but there are we found, I think, about 10 or 15 joint projects with this label, but we have all of their workbooks together. One see that they had done a lot of series, a lot of work. You have unattributed Capa and Taro near to one. You really have to look who was there and to find out. And there are a lot of photos of this period when they worked together and had their joint copyright Capa and Taro. We still now cannot distinguish them, and I think it's also a thing we have to accept, because at that time they are a team, they are a collective, and it wasn't important for them who did the photo. It was more important to have a good story done together and to try to publish it. But of course, the fact that her photos in the beginning were published under the Capa copyright, this fact contributed, of course, later on to her disappearance. This is again out of the workbooks. These here are pictures from Gerda Taro, and these are Taro, are from Capa. The both above, and this here is a Capa, but here we have a Taro. This is a Capa. It's very difficult, and lots of them we only can identify because at that time they were published with the correct names, and we can find that, and also we can find the places because we know that she was at the Hamara front with General El Campesino, who is here. a lot of such details must help to find out, and I think there are several photographs of them. We cannot say exactly really and say with 100% this is Capa or this is Taro from that time. A fundamental element of the working method that Taro developed in partnership with Capa was proximity, which was mainly built on their belief in solidarity, a political solidarity with the Republican side, but also more general, an empathy with the ordinary people. That approach to photography is expressed, you know, that famous diction by Capas, if your pictures aren't good enough, you are not close enough. This approach was developed by them together in situ, and I think that in turn of that, that their experience of exile and what they experienced in Spain, that produced authenticity, because I think they tried sometimes nowadays it seems to be such a slogan, this Capa dictum. But I think in that time it wasn't a slogan. It was really a need of them. They tried to do it, and they were under pressure, because in Spain one should be aware that both of them themselves, they fight for their own future, because they knew when Spain is lost, they can't go back to Germany or things like that, and they threatened what will happen in Europe and so on. My German is not so fine to speak free. I hope you know what I want to say about that. Taro didn't seek the perspective of the weapon for her documentary work. She wasn't a combat photographer. Instead, they tried to overcome the status of the eyewitness to achieve the perspective of the participant. I want to distinguish that she is not a combat photographer, because at the same time we have the development to a combat photographer who really have more the view of the weapon and not the interests Taro and Capa had for the proximity. They went into attacks or things like that. During the war, Taro became a tireless witness who filmed and photographed at nearly all front lines in Spain. She was driven by her desire to use the media in order to undermine the appeasement policy of the Western powers. From Claude Cockburn, perhaps you know him in Great Britain here, more on the Frank Pitcairn. I don't know if you know, he was a correspondent of the Daily Worker. From him, we know that she had in mind to supply photographic evidence for the non-intervention committee here in London. And we have several photos of her where we see they are absolutely not interesting as in the aspects of press photography, and perhaps these were pictures she sought to show evidence the influence of the Germans in that time when the non-intervention committee said it's not necessary that the Western democracies go into this war. At the beginning of July 1937, she documented the Second International Writers' Congress on the Defense of Culture in Valencia and Madrid. Taro focused on prominent literary figures from the UK, for example, Stephen Spender, or here this is Sylvia Townsend Warner. Then Taro went to Brunete from the Congress, during the time when the Congress was there was a a huge battle round of the capital, round of Madrid. And she went to Brunete outside the capital to cover the battle for her Parisian newspaper, The Soir. And during a hasty retreat of the Republican troops, she jumped on the running board of a car which transported casualties. And this retreat was fired by low-flying planes, and suddenly Gerda fell on the ground, was overrun by an own tank, by an out-of-control Republican tank. And she died in a field hospital in the early hours of July 26 in 1937, a few days before her 27th birthday. Gerda Taro, or La Pequeña Rubia, the little blonde, as the Spaniards called her, was the first female photographer to be killed in action, and the first who had photographed in the heat of the battle. For a short time, she became an anti-fascist heroine. Taro was laid out in Madrid, in Valencia, in Paris. And her funeral in Paris was organized by the French Communist Party. Tens of thousands attended the funeral cortege to the cemetery. And her destiny became a symbol for the international solidarity with the Spanish Republic at that time. This chewing gum card, an American chewing gum card from 1938, it shows her accident in a series. It's called True Stories of Modern Warfare. And on the back side, there is Gerda Taro's story. After the end of World War II, her work partly vanished into Capa's work, and Taro was forgotten within a short time. While his photographs became part of the visual history of Spanish Civil War, the Taro-Capa cooperation was zoomed down to a love affair, and it was during the time it was even questioned whether she ever photographed. This is my working material. Some of the pictures are really not very fine. Sorry for the quality. I see that. It was not until the mid-1990s that the pioneering photojournalist Gerda Taro was rediscovered and reinstated in her proper role in a profession until then dominated by men. It took now 10 more years until she finally got her first exhibition, which you now can see at the Barbican. And during we prepared this show, Richard Whelan, the Capa biographer, and I, we worked very closely together, and it was a very fruitful cooperation. And I want to dedicate this evening to Richard, because Richard died during this work together in last May. And I want to think of him with this because he had done a big part not only about research work about Robert Capa, but he was also the one who supported my work very much. And last but not least, now to the end, I want to say thank you to John Morris, who did the introduction, because John Morris was the man who was my door opener for Gerda Taro in New York, and who was the one who convinced the younger brother of Robert Capa, Colonel Capa, that it makes a sense when I would look in the archives and would work something about Gerda Taro. Because for a long time he said, that's not interesting, or things like that. But now we are here on a point where I think, and John, we always thought it's interesting to look at her. Thank you, John.
And I thank you.
It's necessary to say that because
This is a new light on history. This is a remarkable thing. The story of Gerda Taro has never come out until Irma dug it, and it was, I know it was very important. I meant before introducing her, to mention that in my senior year at the University of Chicago was 1936-37. And in April 37 occurred the annual this was nationwide, student strike against war and fascism. The left was bitterly divided, as you said. The socialists would not even speak to the communists and vice versa. And I was chosen as the chairman of the peace strike because I was a student journalist, and therefore could talk to any of them. But that fall, as a graduate student, I didn't take my studies very seriously because I decided I wanted to be a journalist, and once I had a degree, that was enough. But I hung around and started a student magazine, and in the October issue, 1937, we published letters from University of Chicago students from Spain. A number of Chicago students went and fought with the International Brigade, which was later dissolved. One or two of them died. And in looking through the magazine with Shem, who was David Seymour, another of the founders of Magnum, the October issue with the letters from Spain, from students in Spain, Shem pointed to a picture and he said, Capa took that, and I took this. And the reason for that, there was no credit at all, was simply that they were distributed by Spanish War Relief. I spoke yesterday to the BBC 4 on radio, expressing my sorrow that this controversy over the falling soldier ever got started. I blame Philip Knightley for that. I was hoping he would come tonight. I've already argued this case with him here. He has never corrected the mistakes he made in the first edition of his book, The First Casualty. I regret that he's not here tonight. Let me tell you one story that will illustrate the character of Bob Capa. And by the way, there will be a gallery tour at the Barbican tomorrow afternoon, 2:30. The person who couldn't be here tonight was Cynthia Young from New York, from the ICP, who curated the Robert Capa show, and she will lead the gallery tour, and I will join her. It's a really remarkable exhibition, the two combined on the top floor of the gallery there, and I urge you to come. But my story about Capa is this. A month or so after D-Day, I told my wife that a man is a coward with the bombs, with the V1 and V2 coming on to London. I wrote home saying, you know, I'm going to the front. It's much less dangerous than staying in London, which wasn't true, of course. And I spent 4 weeks in Normandy. And Bob and I managed to spend 2 or 3 nights at Mont Saint-Michel with Ernest Hemingway and Bill Walton of Time magazine. It was a great respite from the war. Otherwise, we were living in the First Army press camp. I was embedded, by the way, rather I was encotted. There's nothing wrong with being embedded. You have to get to war. If you have to get to war, there's no hotel chain usually normally available. So embedded, a lot of people debunk embedded photographers, and that's really kind of nonsensical in my view. At any rate, about Capa, we had worked our way to the very front, an observation post at Saint-Malo. There was a German garrison holding out stubbornly. They held out for weeks. It was they were totally surrounded. It was absolutely ridiculous. But we were held back, and we found an artillery commander in this forward outpost, which was just a pension right on the beach looking at the city. And the artillery commander, who's a lieutenant colonel, as I recall, didn't know what to do. He didn't know whether to order another barrage on these Germans or to use sound trucks, psychological warfare, and talk them into surrender. And Bob was disgusted with officers who couldn't make up their minds. And he shrugged and said, "Why don't you ask the Germans what to do?" So the officer replied to Bob, "I don't speak German. You do. Would you do it?" So Robert Capa took his camera off, gave it to me, and then somebody brought a pole and tied a white handkerchief on it. Fortunately, a machine gun started firing just at that time, so the whole thing was called off. But when Capa gave me his camera and saw that the obvious story was to follow him, and saw what I was about to do, he said, "None of that. You've got kids at home," which is true. At any rate, it illustrates Robert Capa, who to me was a fantastic man. I've often called him my adopted Hungarian brother, explaining that I don't have a real brother and my sister's a lifelong Republican. It was a little annoying to me to hear the word Republican spoken of so warmly tonight. I'm a different kind of American. In fact, I've been very active in the Obama campaign back in Paris. Anyway, I've spoken much too much. I think it's time for questions. I'll field them if you like. I'll do it. She's going to answer it.
She's going to answer, that's right.
Any questions for Irma? Oh, come on.
We'll go over the back first and then come down here.
Do you anticipate an English translation of your book?
We're at the moment we are just discuss about that with the publisher, or it's in the beginning of a discussion, and we hope very much that we will find a publisher for it, because here I think it would be very fine. There is a French edition, an Italian edition, and perhaps it would be very fine to have also an English edition to have that. But it's not available now. You can only have a look on a German edition here at the door before. And we have in the catalog we have in a short form we have an English text. Okay, that's the way.
Okay, I think there's a question here.
Yeah. Were you able to find any members of Gerda's family that are still alive?
No.
None.
Her family was. I did a lot of research on her family. Because when I started the biography, it was absolutely difficult to find something about her private life. Because when Gerda died, she didn't left back letters or a suitcase or things like that. I started to work on her via Robert Capa. It was the thing go back from Spanish Civil War and Capa, and the rest we have what remained from that time. And it was very difficult to find out something in Germany in the beginning. And what I could find out was that after difficult things or so, that the whole family was murdered in the Holocaust in Yugoslavia, because her parents, they tried to emigrate in 1936, 1937. They tried to emigrate to England or Palestine. They had two in the cards I found in the Jewish archive there in Leipzig. They addressed England or Palestine, and they got to Yugoslavia because they went out of Germany, and in Yugoslavia they were because some relatives of the family lived there, and I think that they, for some time, they felt very safe there. It was also the time when Gerda Taro died and was and the funeral was in Paris. Her father and her brother came from Zagreb, from Yugoslavia, to Paris, and they must have felt safe there. But in 1941, the German Wehrmacht came to Croatia, and that time I could find out relatives. There was one relative, a woman who has married one of the Pohorilla family of this circle, and she was the only Aryan, and she was the only one who could say that they came to a concentration camp, and they were I don't know the English word. Die gehörten zu denen, die Deutschen haben damals die ersten Gaswagen getestet, und das ist dort passiert in Jugoslawien, diese Gaslastwagen.
Well, the Nazis tested the first
Trucks.
gas. The trucks. The Nazis tested the first trucks with gas, and they were the first victims of this test.
In this test.
What later on was developed in Auschwitz in an industrial way.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take a question here and then across, and then we'll come back again.
During the Spanish Civil War, typically, what are the mechanics for getting the rolls of film to Paris, say, and to go via an agent and then to the publisher? And what was the time delay between taking the shot and actually getting it published in a magazine?
Can you speak a little bit slowlier?
Okay, sorry. In the 1930s, typically, what was the mechanics for transporting the rolls of film to the magazine?
To the magazine.
How long did it take? Did it go via an agent first? Mm-hmm. How long before it was published? And did they lose many rolls?
That could be. We don't know that if they lose a lot of film. But it was really a problem that day. And it was in the first days. It wasn't organized. They really went to Spain, and they gave their films to the pilots, to some pilots who went and were trusted that they will bring them to a place in Paris, or they gave them to Brigadisten, to some people who were there and returned to Paris. It was not organized, and they always needed people whom they could trust. And I think it was about November, December, or a little bit later, then they had their ways how to bring the things. But very often when they were they had their place when they were in Madrid or in Valencia. But outside of that, it was really very often a problem to bring the rolls on the material very fast to Paris or somewhere else. And I know from photographers of that time whom I interviewed that they really often gave the materials to somebody they didn't know, they never saw before. And he said, I go to Paris or I go to Madrid, and perhaps I will find somebody who go to Paris and go bring it back or bring it to the town. I think therefore the idea that a lot of material perhaps never reached the darkroom there, or so it's thinkable. But I think in 1937 this was more organized, especially in Spain itself, because they had their press bureau, press offices, and they had their own system there. Build it. But I think really in the first half year or so it was a really chaotic system.
Okay, we have a question at the back, and then we'll go across here.
After Gerda's death, who was responsible for her collected works, for the archive of her material, and why wasn't there some, if not promotion of her material at the time, why wasn't there at least some defense of her achievements? Mm-hmm. Why did she disappear into obscurity?
Mm-hmm. That's a complex question. There was nobody who looked after her photographs. It was so that since the beginning, she worked very close with Robert Capa. And Robert Capa, when Gerda died, he went on further making photographs. He himself never was a type who worked in the archive and do something therein. There was a girlfriend from Gerda, Ruth Berg, who did that for him. She also very often made the captions for him and things like that. And I think all of Gerda's friends, Capa and other ones, they had no idea that this is a work, an oeuvre, and they should look after them. It was part of a thing they fight it. They worked with this material. In their sense, it was not a thing where they where they looked after her. Look for oder after her work, sich darum kümmern, to look after her work. And later on, you might think Capa went on to cover Spanish Civil War, and then he went on to cover Second World War. He always has been on the front lines. And after World War II, it was so that nearly nobody was anymore interested in pictures from Spanish Civil War, because there had been such a situation that everybody had to look how he survived, and one was interested in the pictures about the things what happened around during the Second World War. And I say only in shortcuts now, the reasons who made it that Gerda disappeared totally. And after the World War, it was so that we had a situation with the Cold War. And it was so that it was helpful to make it in a way, when we simplify the story, we can say Capa was the one who made the pictures. And to look back, it was good to say Gerda was the one who was for the politics. And they make a kind of Arbeitsteilung im Nachhinein.
A division of work.
A division of work. Capa was the photographer. Gerda was the one who was the left-wing politics in the beginning, because that was the time when the McCarthy time came up, and Capa very often had problems because of his origin, and because he had no passport. He had no American passport at that time. And therefore, it was so that in 1949, the FBI started a folder about Gerda, because that time in America, all the journalists and so were checked about their history. What have they done in Europe, and on which side had they been? And I think these all such reasons were there, because then Capa didn't found an official memory for Gerda. Also, you have to wait until my book is in English, because it's a little bit too simple, but some points.
Okay, we've got a whole load of questions down here. This lady was first. Can I just pass the microphone on?
What led you to tell her story? What led you to tell her story, to make people aware of her?
In the beginning, I never thought that I will make a biography or make an exhibition about her, because my special field is exile studies. But in that, when I started with Gerda Taro, there were several accidents, Zufälle? Zufall? I don't... Accidents. Several incidents fell to that. But what I can say was, what for me was one point to work on that story and to make such an extensive research was really because in Gerda's story we have a little bit a concentration of many questions of the 20th century. In Germany, of course, the question of Holocaust, of Jewish people, and how could it happen that they first were integrated and part of the society, and how did it work to put them out? I could show that very good in Gerda's youth time, because I could find schoolmates and so on, and it was interesting to interview them. Later on, it was for me interesting to see a young woman of the 1920s who was very interested in glamour, in fashion and things like that, and how it could happen that she in a very short time became a political conscious, and all the impact of political situation or so. There were so many points in Gerda's history which I found for myself very interesting, because these are very often have been very often questions nowadays are also important, and therefore it was not a boring research to do, and also it was a system we call in German a snowball system. And you always get a new hint, and it's like a detective, and it's nice to do that when somebody gives you the money. The other problem.
Okay, we have time for a few more. Let's go to this lady first, and then finally the lady in the corner just there.
I get the impression that without Gerda, Robert Capa would not have had the same kind of identity. I get the feeling that in his early years, when he first met her, she had a great influence on how he projected himself, and that helped make him into an icon. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would agree with that, of course. And there is to make it short, there is a nice novel by Martha Gellhorn. She has written it when Robert Capa died in 1954. And it's called about Until Death Will Divide Us, or things like that. And there she describes Capa's background with Gerda, and that she made it a little bit pathetic, but in its nucleus, I think the idea is correct, that she write that Capa covered the next war and next war to show how bad this world was who took his Gerda away, because when they together started to cover war, I don't think that they went to Spain and had a plan to become war photographers. I think they had other ideas for their future, but it was necessary to fight now. And then he had to face that he always had that the problem goes on, and Gerda was like a Vermächtnis. A heritage for him, perhaps, and perhaps this is also the reason why he never brought that to the outside. I think it was also, it had also a very personal level for him. It was.
I got the impression from Alex Kershaw's book that she was about to leave him, and she had finished with him, and when he went back to Paris, she remained in Spain. Mm-hmm. Do you think, had she survived, she would have continued on her own, or do you think the two of them would? Well, I guess you can't tell, but her pictures towards the end were getting really strong on their own.
Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit sad about this story, that that the love story of them cooled down and things like that. I know that these things all come back to my book, because I describe it there, because I interviewed there Ted Allen. Ted Allen was a Canadian volunteer who was very beloved, in love with Gerda, and he wished that Gerda would also love him. And later on, Ted Allen, he has written books. He was a scriptwriter in Hollywood and so on. Ted Allen is the only one who told us about the fact that he said their love cooled down, and Gerda stayed with me in Madrid, and I think he had a lot of hopes that something happened, I don't know. But it is so that this is always now simplified to one sentence that happened, and is always linked with the situation that, with the fact that Gerda tried to make her own copyright and had her own stamp. But we found, meanwhile, after I had written my book, we found photographs from Gerda Taro with the copyright Taro from August 1936, from the first things. And therefore, for me as a researcher, it's much more complicated to find out about the copyrights, but also it's too much simplified to have this love story and great love, and then it zoomed down. And I know around Capa it's always the story of love and war, but it's not so simply as one time was. Now Hollywood is planning again drama about them, and I think it will be a drama for me, perhaps. I don't know what they will say or so. We have to wait. But I think this will one of the main focus of them will be.
Okay, we have time for one more question with this lady down here.
Well, it's not so much a question, although there is something I would like to ask you. I mean, I would also like to say that for me, she's not been discovered. I mean, I have known about Taro for many, many, many years, and I'm only an amateur in my interest in the Spanish Civil War and in photojournalism. But her existence, not just as a lover of Robert Capa, but as a photographer. And there are other well-known, wonderful women photographers who went to Spain.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like to ask you about Please, I mean, I think it's wonderful that you've done this work and are very excited about it. I was very interested by the fact that you seem to try and situate her not as a combat photographer, but as an eyewitness. And I thought that also perhaps is also situating her work in a different place from perhaps what Robert Capa went on to be. And also perhaps the contribution, her political context. In other words, she was a socialist, and she went to the Spanish Civil War perhaps as a socialist, and wanted to be an eyewitness and wanted to participate and record what was happening. Is that what you feel? Is that what you think her place in history is?
Yes, I think, of course, that Gerda really had the need that she fight in Spain, what I tried to say in a short form, for her own future. And the ideas for this future were not only the ideas to avoid World War II or to stop Hitler. These ideas were also positive. They had ideas for another society. And things like that. In the circles where Gerda was somebody who came from the, was a lot of together with people from the Naturfreunde-Jugend.
Friends of the Earth.
There were a lot of friends of the Earth, but they were political also. There was a very interesting influence in the people around her, and therefore I think somebody of the people who know her in Paris, she told me Gerda was not intellectual. She was not the one who, in their circles, who discussed many, because the women very often didn't discuss, but the men around there. But she said Gerda was somebody, she had ideas, and she had things she wanted to have, and therefore it was important for her, don't be with the Stalinists or things like that. But she had later on, of course, in Spain, she had the problem when in Spain Stalin became a problem for a photographer and so on. And I think that time, therefore it wasn't wrong that somebody thought she was murdered or things like that. Yeah, but my German is too poor to have the discussion around that. Sorry.
Okay, I think we have run out of time for this particular room, but I'm sure Irme will answer any more of your questions that you have after this. I would like to say the book Gerda Taro, which is edited by Irme Schaber, is on sale. They are selling it at the Barbican, I believe. So if you go down to the exhibition, do take a look at this book, and it'll be on the back here, so please have a look as well on your way out. But for the moment, I would like to thank very much Irme Schaber for coming in today, presenting the photos. Thank you.